Hello, dear listener. I am grateful you are here with me today. Please subscribe so you can stay close for the next story and tell me in the comments which city or country you are listening from. It always touches my heart to see how far these moments reach. Enjoy the listen. The night feels like a wide, quiet ocean breathing gently against the edges of time, as if the past has risen from its deep, forgotten waters to call out through the dark. And tonight, I feel those distant voices moving through the air, soft, steady, unbroken, like threads of light, stretching across generations, seeking to be seen and heard once more. The stories of women who carried battles inside their bones while the world looked away, women whose courage shaped a nation that never learned to say their names. My voice drifts through the stillness, like a small lantern in a world too large to understand its own shadows, and I begin to walk down the long corridor of history, a place woven from torn pages, erased memories, and echoes too faint for anyone to hear unless they listen with their soul. And I listen now because these women deserve that gentleness, that attention, that love and truth. The first presence rises before me like a soft outline made of dust and sunlight. Olive Oatman, a girl once, but transformed by a violence that shattered her world in a single moment. Her story is not a tale written to comfort anyone. It is the trembling heartbeat of survival when survival was the only language left for her to speak. I see her as she once stood on the open frontier. The sky stretched endlessly above her, and the road ahead filled with the innocence of a journey she believed would lead to a new home, a new beginning. But fate can turn without warning. It can break the ground beneath our feet before we even breathe enough to understand what is happening. And that is how it began for her. The silence before the storm, the last breath of safety before the world changed its shape forever. The attack came swift and merciless, tearing her family apart with a cruelty that no child should witness, yet she did, and the memory became a scar etched so deep that it lived inside her even when the dust of time tried to bury it. Her hands trembled, her voice gone, her heart forced to keep beating even as it shattered piece by fragile piece. In captivity, she became two people at once: the girl she used to be, fading like a distant star, and the woman she was forced to become, rising like the moon born from wounds and ashes. She was given marks on her face, not as decoration, not as beauty, but as a symbol of belonging to a world she never asked for. Yet she carried those blue markings with a calm, fierce dignity that the world could never wash away. I imagine her walking across the desert, her shadow stretched long behind her footsteps carrying the weight of stories she never chose to live, each sunrise giving her no promise except that she must rise again, and each night whispering that she had survived one more day in a world she had not been prepared to endure. And yet, she lived with a certain quiet strength, a strength that grows only when the heart has broken so deeply that it learns how to rebuild itself using nothing but hope and memory. When she was finally brought back into the world she once knew, she returned not as the girl she had been, but as a woman shaped by fire, loss, and unspoken wisdom. She stood before strangers who studied her like a mystery they could not solve, but she no longer needed their understanding. She carried her own truth, and that was enough. The marks on her face never faded. The world saw them as scars, but I see them now as the map of her journey, proof that she walked through the unthinkable and still stood tall, that she endured what few ever could, that she survived not because she was unbroken, but because she learned how to live even with the brokenness. And as her presence fades softly into the shadows, another voice rises from the quiet, her name carried like a tender echo, Mary Kinnan. Her story shaped not by choice, but by the cruel hand of conflict and fate, a woman who faced unimaginable terror only to emerge with a soul still willing to speak her truth even when her voice trembled. I see her walking through the wilderness, her clothes torn by branches, her spirit torn by grief, yet her eyes fierce with the desperate fire of someone who refuses to disappear. Her family taken from her, her heart crushed beneath the weight of loss, and yet she kept moving. Through forests, through storms, through nights that felt endless, because some part of her still believed that life was waiting for her somewhere on the other side of terror. The world rarely remembers women like Mary, but I do tonight. I feel her presence brush against my skin like cold wind, carrying the scent of old forgotten winters, and I imagine her writing her account decades ago, each word a trembling memory she forced herself to revisit, not to relive the pain, but to say, I was here and I live this, and I refuse to be erased. Her courage was not loud, it did not roar like thunder, it spoke in quiet determination in the way she continued breathing even when it hurt, in the way she found the strength to rebuild her life from the ruins left behind. Her story is a reminder that bravery is not always found in battlefields. Sometimes it is found in the simple act of surviving a day that was never meant to be survived at all. Decades passed, and the roads she traveled became part of a story rarely told. Her poetry echoed long after she stepped down from the stage. Her legacy became woven into the fabric of movements that would rise years later, carried by women who never knew her name yet. Followed the trail she left behind, a trail carved with resilience and unwavering compassion. Frances Harper became a hidden hero, not because history forgot her, but because the world was not yet ready to fully recognize a woman whose strength was wrapped in gentleness, whose vision extended far beyond her own lifetime. Her story whispers through time, reminding us that true power often moves quietly, reshaping the world in ways that cannot be measured by fame or monuments. The story moves deeper into the heart of America, carried by the slow hum of history and the quiet footsteps of a woman who walked into danger long before the world learned to honor her name. Her name was Sybil Ludington, a 16-year-old girl whose bravery once halted the fall of an entire region, yet time allowed her memory to fade like ink left too long in the sun. It was a cold April night, and the air hung heavy with the scent of rain when Sybil heard the urgent knock on the wooden door of her family home. The messenger stood trembling, soaked from the storm, his breath broken by panic. British forces were advancing, burning settlements, destroying everything in their path. The militia needed to be rallied, but the men who would defend their homes were scattered miles apart across the dark countryside. Her father, the commander of the local regiment, prepared to leave, but Sybil stepped forward with a steadiness beyond her years. She saw the worn exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing hard against him. She knew the roads better than anyone, and she knew the danger even more, yet something fierce and unshakable rose inside her, a fire lit by the love of her home and the belief that courage does not wait for permission. Before anyone could protest, she mounted her horse, gripping the reins with chilled fingers. She felt the storm breathe against her face, the wind whipping her hair as if trying to pull her back. But she refused to yield. She urged the horse forward into the darkness, her heart pounding in rhythm with the thunder rolling through the hills. The night swallowed her whole. The trees loomed like towering shadows, and the roads twisted in ways only locals understood. The rain blurred the edges of the world, and every sound carried the possibility of danger. Yet Sybil pressed onward, shouting warnings at each farmhouse, pounding on doors, calling men to their posts. Her voice rose against the storm like a beacon refusing to be silenced. Miles passed beneath the hooves of her horse until they blended into one long, desperate stretch of earth. She was drenched and shaking, but she would not stop. She imagined the faces of families who would sleep safely because she kept riding. She imagined the fire she was preventing, the lives she was protecting, and that vision kept her moving through the relentless night. At one point, a branch snapped in the woods and her breath caught in her throat. She knew the enemy patrols could be nearby. She knew capture, or worse, was only a heartbeat away. Still, she rode deeper into the dark, trusting the strength within her more than she trusted the trembling in her hands. She whispered to herself not words of comfort, but vows of determination, as if reminding her own heart that fear has no power over purpose. When she finally completed the 40-mile ride, her horse collapsed from exhaustion, and Sybil nearly fell to her knees. The night had carved itself into her soul, leaving both scars and triumph. Yet the men she rallied arrived ready to defend their territory because of her ride, because she faced what seasoned soldiers feared, because she stepped into the storm without looking back. The British troops were pushed back and the region saved quietly, without celebration, without the thunder of recognition. Sybil returned home before dawn, covered in mud and bruises, her hands raw from gripping the reins. She stood in silence beside her horse, whispering gratitude to the animal that carried her through the darkest night of her young life. No one would write her name into the grand books of the Revolution for nearly 2 centuries, but the truth of her courage survived in the spoken memories passed from one generation to the next. Years later, when she grew older, she rarely spoke of that night. Perhaps she believed bravery is not something to boast about, but something lived once in a moment when the world needs it most. Perhaps she knew that the greatest acts often bloom in silence, witnessed only by the stars and by the hearts they save. The path of hidden heroes now leads into the quiet halls of science, where a woman once stood unseen though her brilliance illuminated discoveries that reshaped the destiny of human knowledge. Her name was Alice Ball, a young chemist whose mind worked with a clarity and grace that the world was not ready to recognize, yet whose contribution healed countless lives long before her own story emerged from the shadows. Alice grew up with a deep curiosity that glowed like a lantern she carried everywhere. She studied plants, minerals, the delicate fibers of nature, and the invisible laws that shaped the world around her, while other children played unaware of the mysteries unfolding. At their feet, she crouched close to the soil, letting questions bloom inside her imagination, questions that stretched into dreams and dreams that stretched into purpose. She arrived at the University of Hawaii at a time when very few women, especially women of color, were welcomed into the world of chemistry, yet she walked through the doors with a quiet dignity. Refusing to let the weight of unfamiliar stares pull her away from the path she felt destined to follow, she entered each lab with the same calm determination, letting her work speak for her, letting her brilliance form its own undeniable truth. During this time, the world was facing a devastating disease, leprosy, a word that carried fear and despair. A diagnosis meant isolation and hopelessness, yet Alice found herself drawn to the problem not by ambition, but by compassion. She could not ignore the pain of people who had been pushed into the margins of society, people who waited for healing that never seemed to come. She studied chalmugra oil, the only existing treatment for leprosy, yet its bitter taste and harsh side effects made it nearly impossible for patients to endure. She worked day and night searching for a way to transform the oil into something the human body could accept. A form gentle enough to heal. 100 experiments failed, then 100 more, yet Alice kept shaping solutions with the patience of someone who understood that progress is often born from persistence rather than perfection. Late one evening, with the lab lit softly by a single lamp and the air thick with the scent of chemicals, she approached the experiment once more, her hands steady, her breath calm, her heart focused. She separated molecules, broke them down, rebuilt them, and discovered a method that allowed the treatment to be absorbed into the bloodstream safely, effectively, beautifully. Her process would later be known as the Ball method, a breakthrough that brought hope to thousands. But fate dealt her a cruel hand. Before she could witness the impact of her work, she fell ill due to an accident in the laboratory, an accident caused by the very chemicals she worked with so tirelessly. Her life ended before she had the chance to see how many people she would save, how many families would remain whole because of her discovery. In a world shaped by inequity, her achievement was quietly taken by others. A man placed his own name on her work, allowing history to forget the young woman who had made the scientific miracle possible. For decades, her story remained hidden beneath layers of silence until truth began to rise again, pushed forward by those who refused to let her light be stolen forever. Alice Ball healed lives she never met, offered hope she never saw unfold, and carried humility so deep she never demanded recognition. Her legacy is a whisper in the world of science, reminding us that sometimes the most extraordinary contributions come from those who work in stillness, seeking nothing more than the chance to make life better for someone else. The journey now drifts to the quiet fields and hospitals of wartime America, where a woman once walked with steadfast hands and a tender heart. Her name was Clara Barton, the angel of the battlefield, a woman who dared to defy expectations and carry hope into the places where despair and fear ran thick. Clara grew up in a small Massachusetts town, a girl with restless curiosity and a determination that could not be contained. She learned early that rules were made by men who often refused to see the capability of women, yet she refused to be limited. Her mind was sharp, her hands capable, and her heart expansive. She sought a life where service and compassion could be transformed into action. When the Civil War erupted, Clara did not wait for permission. She packed supplies, medicine, blankets, and courage into wagons and traveled toward the front lines, carrying with her the belief that human life was sacred and every wounded soul deserved care. She navigated smoke and gunfire, the cries of the injured, and the chaos of armies marching across open fields. She moved steadily, offering comfort, water, a bandage, a touch of reassurance to those who might never survive the night. Her work was grueling and relentless. She often labored without rest, without recognition, without the relief of seeing her own family, knowing that each act of care was a seed planted into a barren landscape. Yet, she continued. She learned to organize field hospitals, to manage supplies, to train nurses to follow her example, because she understood that courage alone was not enough. The world needed structure, and she would provide it. Even when the war seemed endless and the faces of suffering multiplied, Clara never faltered. Her eyes carried a quiet flame of resolve. Her voice spoke with authority yet tenderness. To commanders, soldiers, and nurses alike, she demanded dignity for those who could no longer speak for themselves, and she insisted that the wounded be treated with respect regardless of race, status, or rank. After the war, Clara refused to leave the work unfinished. She founded the American Red Cross, bringing together communities and resources to respond to disaster, natural and human-made alike. Her vision extended beyond borders, beyond politics, beyond prejudice. She carried the lessons of the battlefield into the hearts of her nation, showing that compassion, when combined with courage, can reshape a country. She faced skepticism and resistance from those who believed a woman could not lead a national organization. She faced exhaustion, loneliness, and the constant pressure of immense responsibility. Yet, she pressed on. She reminded herself that the measure of life is not found in comfort, but in service. She reminded herself that the work of healing is often invisible, yet profoundly transformative. Clara's legacy lives in every hospital, in every ambulance, in every disaster relief effort, in every act of selfless care that rises without expectation of reward. She showed the world that courage is not only found on battlefields or in heroic gestures, but in the steady hands and open heart of a woman willing to act when others stand back. The journey now moves into the restless heartbeat of the American South, where a woman once walked against a tide of cruelty so fierce it sought to break the very spirit of her people. Her name was Ida B. Wells, a journalist, a truth-teller, a force who refused to bow to fear, even when the world around her trembled with violence. Ida's life began in the shadow of the Civil War, a time when freedom had been declared, yet justice remained distant, like a horizon that never seemed to come closer. She grew up with the understanding that survival required strength, but living with dignity required something even greater, a fire that burned fiercely beneath the ribs, a determination to stand upright when the world demanded silence. She became a teacher as a young woman, shaping minds in classrooms that barely held together, rooms with creaking floors, cracked windows, and chalk dust that floated like weary ghosts. Yet, she gave her students more than lessons. She gave them belief in their worth, belief in their future, belief that their voices mattered even when others tried to erase them. But the turning point in her life came with a single moment of unimaginable horror. 3 of Ida's closest friends, men who had dared to build a business that brought pride to their community, were murdered by a mob, their blood soaked into the earth, and their names were nearly snatched away by lies that attempted to justify their deaths. Ida stood in that grief and felt something inside her shift, an awakening so fierce it reshaped the entire course of her life. She took up her pen not as a tool, but as a weapon forged from truth. She wrote fearlessly, exposing the brutality of lynching across the South. Each sentence she crafted was a flame illuminating darkness, each article a mirror held to the face of a nation that wanted to look away. She knew the danger. She knew that unveiling the truth meant placing her own life in jeopardy. Yet, she kept writing, guided by a moral compass so steady no threat could make it waver. When her newspaper office was burned to ashes and her name was placed at the top of death lists, she fled Memphis. But she did not retreat. She continued her work from the North, traveling across states, delivering speeches, investigating cases, gathering testimonies from mothers, widows, and children whose loved ones had been stolen from them. Her voice rose not with rage, but with righteous clarity, an unwavering call for justice that resonated through crowded halls and quiet living rooms alike. There were nights when fear sat close beside her, breathing against her ear, whispering all she could lose if she kept going, but courage sat on the other side of her, whispering back, reminding her of the families still grieving, reminding her of the truth still hidden, reminding her that silence would never protect the innocent. She chose courage every time. Ida traveled to England, where people listened with shock and grief as she detailed the savagery unfolding in a country that claimed freedom for all. Her words shook audiences awake, and pressure mounted on America from across the ocean, urging change, urging Accountability urging humanity. Her voice had become something larger than herself, a force echoing across continents. Still, the cost of her mission weighed heavily. She sacrificed safety, she sacrificed comfort, she sacrificed the chance to live an ordinary life. Yet, she continued her fight, building organizations, founding clubs, and leading movements with the same fierce heart that guided her. First written lines, she reminded women, especially Black women, that they possessed power not given by society, but inherited from generations who survived the impossible. Ida B. Wells lived her life like a blazing torch, daring to shine in a time when every flame was threatened with extinction. She stood where few dared to stand and spoke truths that many feared to hear. She carried the stories of the unheard on her shoulders, refusing to let their memory vanish into silence. Her courage helped bend the arc of history toward justice, even if it bent slowly, painfully, and incompletely. The story now rises into the quiet corridors of mathematics and space, where a woman once worked in near obscurity, her brilliance hidden behind doors that opened only for a chosen few. Yet she kept walking forward, guided by a steady belief in the power of numbers and in the truth that every mind deserves the chance to shine. Her name was Katherine Johnson, a woman whose calculations carried America beyond the sky while the world barely whispered her name. Katherine grew up in the hills of West Virginia, where the stars glittered above her like scattered diamonds. She felt drawn to them even as a child, studying their patterns, learning their rhythms, imagining what secrets they held. She learned quickly, far more quickly than her teachers expected, and soon her hunger for knowledge stretched beyond the boundaries of her small world. She devoured books, solved equations with ease, and stepped into classrooms built for students much older than she was, walking with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged even when others questioned it. When she finally entered the halls of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the organization that would one day become NASA, she was met with walls thicker than steel, not the kind made of metal, but the kind made of prejudice and exclusion. The room she was placed in was divided between computers, who were women tasked with performing calculations, and engineers who doubted those women could ever rise above the work assigned to them. Yet Katherine did not let the weight of those limitations settle on her shoulders. She remained focused, steady, resilient, as she moved through the maze of numbers that defined the dawn of the space age. Her talent became impossible to ignore. She saw patterns in equations the way musicians see music. She recognized relationships between variables the way artists recognize the flow of color. She could solve complex trajectories in her mind before her pencil even touched paper. She worked through long nights filled with chalk dust and tension, listening to the hum of machines and the rustle of papers and the faint echo of doubts surrounding her. But those doubts never entered her heart. She trusted her gift more than she feared their disbelief. Then came the mission that changed everything. The first American astronaut was preparing to orbit the Earth, and the calculations needed to be perfect, because even the smallest error could shatter the fragile hope that humanity carried into that moment. The world watched NASA with breathless anticipation, but inside the control room trust remained divided. The new electronic computers produced numbers that few dared to rely on, and the astronaut John Glenn requested something revolutionary. He asked for Katherine specifically. He wanted her to check every number by hand, because he knew that her mind held a precision no machine could match. Katherine worked through the equations with a calmness that masked the enormity of the task before her. She charted the path through space, as if mapping a river she had traveled many times before. Her hands moved across the paper with grace, her thoughts cutting through complexity with clarity born from years of persistence. She finished the calculations, passed them forward, and carried on with her day, not seeking praise, not expecting celebration, only hoping that her work would bring the astronaut home safely. When the mission succeeded and Glenn completed his orbit, the world celebrated the achievement of space travel. Yet Katherine's name barely drifted into the public air, still tucked inside the quiet corners of NASA, where she continued her work with dignity, humility, and unshakable determination. She contributed to mission after mission, guiding flights to the moon, supporting the trajectories that shaped the future of exploration. Her fingerprints rested on every milestone, though history waited decades before acknowledging them. There were moments when she felt the sting of being unseen, moments when her achievements were overshadowed by those who stood in front while she remained in the background. Yet she kept moving forward. She believed in possibility. She believed in purpose. She believed in the power of every equation she touched. Catherine's life became a testament to the truth that greatness does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appears in the quiet brilliance of a woman who refused to let her talent be diminished by the boundaries imposed upon her. She broke through those boundaries, one calculation at a time, reshaping the trajectory of a nation and guiding humanity toward the horizon it once feared to reach. Her legacy glows now like a constellation finally recognized in the night sky, guiding new generations, encouraging them to rise regardless of who doubts them, reminding them that the universe is vast and open to all who dare to step toward it. And now the night begins to give way to the first light of morning. The tapestry of hidden female heroes stretches wide and unbroken, reminding us that history is never empty, that even the quietest acts can resonate across generations, that every woman who has walked with courage leaves a path for those who follow. The stories live inside us, the lessons flow through our veins, the courage we witness becomes the courage we carry, and in remembering Olive, Mary, Frances, Sybil, Alice, Clara, Ida, Catherine, we honor every hidden female hero whose life was a gift of resilience, bravery, and enduring hope.